You is stubborn, aren't you? You is stubborn. Won't lift a finger. Save yourself. And that's not a good thing. And so, we continue. Hopefully something will happen. You'll see the light. You'll be aware finally enough to know it isn't just being aware. I've been putting out, get off the pills, folks. Get behind the woodshed. You got to move beyond thinking you awoke and do something. And it's easy to get lulled into these things. This is BTWRLM238. For those of you who pastcast, prodcast, and recast over there at ucy.tv, and Thursday being simulcast over there as well from reallibertymedia.com. And we do this every week, just trying to get something to work. And the only thing it is to get to the work is you, and stop being the cricket. Before I move much further on, just found out last night, Phil Restino is doing a rally, if you will, down there in Daytona Beach, Florida. You only have an hour left. Maybe run down there. You can get the broadcaster will be up by the time you get back to hear the whole program. Maybe broadcast. Maybe you go run down there and help him out. I have a link. It won't come up till later. You can look him up. Maybe check out 108 Morris 108. He's got more information there. I have the Twitter that I sent out yesterday. If you're on Twitter, want to see it quickly, I can just explain. He's over there at 1000 West International Speedway Boulevard in Daytona Beach. They're doing a anniversary rally for the what they call the third annual John C. Conley Rally for 9/11 Truth. Phil's been doing this for years and years, at least since about 2006 when he got woke and then got into action. And so I've not talked with Phil much. We used to do United We Strike for a while when I was involved with that, doing that. And he'd come on periodically, let us know what he was doing. And when I just found out about it, again, I had to find out about it through a third or fourth party. I want you to know if you can get out there, help him out, and if not, contact him anyway. You get the links. Go to which I don't want to actually promote these people, but that's where they are at facebook.com/We Are Change CFL. We Are Change is capital WA and C and capital CFL. We Are Change CFL. If you would want more information on that, it's happening right now. In fact, they've been doing it for 3 hours. We're in the last hour. If you have to and you're there, run down, support him. Tell him you're coming from behind the woodshed to help him out. And don't let some of this stuff slip. People are putting their effort into certain things. I would not be interested in that part, but that's why there's a lot of us. We can get to lots of interesting information to keep the word coming out. It doesn't seem like he's really on a long trail. The information that he's passing around, tens of thousands of packets of information, is still going on since his days in 2006 still. So I want to support him without ever, again, I don't talk with him at all much. I think we've talked maybe twice a long time back, but I realize he's doing something. I want to support those that do things. And those little do things kind of help here and there. I want to thank those that did go to YouTube and did give me a comment, and it was good comments. I didn't see a negative one yet. Again, the negative ones are not negative; they're information that may show me a better path, a better information. Those are very far and few in between, if they are at all. Again, remember we had the thumbs down, but with no comment. It's pretty well useless. A hit and run attack, in a way, is just useless to everybody. If we're going to mean something about this, we'll have to let our positions understood, and so we can move a little bit quicker, a little bit better, a little more properly. And so I thank Mike V. Thank you very much for your support and letting me know about my direction, how I bring this every week. Not knowing really better than to do this, given the immense amount of potential information that we could be giving, and until we hear some specifics, like I was able to respond to emails, hear some specifics, it's harder for me to address them if I can, and I tend to be able to generally. So thank you, Mike V. Thank you to I've Been Here 2017 over at Minds, and your support, your help in spreading the word and your points. Again, I'm closing in on one of my goals on the points for the resubmission of or bonus. What is it? I don't even know what it's called, folks. Promotion, I suppose it is, to get the word out to more people. I've Been Here 2017 has helped in that regard, jump me up a little quicker into that goal area. I now have to figure out a strategy, and I am understanding as I look at this, at least conceivably with my lack of understanding about social media and minds.com, there may be quite a few avenues to actually go to make those points actually work better. And so it helps that you help as you see things to spread the word as you can, whether it's a link, whether it's an insight you hand to someone else and say, hey, you need to listen to this here and there. That's it. So, and also to Helen over there at UCY, thank you. I do know and appreciate your feedback. So, again, appreciate all the, I don't do this, I haven't done this too much in the past, but haven't thanked you all, but I do thank you all. It's all part of what we do and get the word out. And I look at the word, like I said, get off the pills, folks. It's not, like I put in the Twitter, it's not alt-right or alt-left, get behind the woodshed. In other words, get into doing something about what you see. Don't think that this dialogue, this bifurcated path between the blue and the red rainbow was workable for you. That was another trap. And thank you, Grimner. Remind also on the minds.com. Yeah, I don't have those things too captured in my mind. I'm noticing I'm having less and less of this stuff captured in my mind as more and more of the work gets maybe in a way grueling, overloading, but in fact so much more important. And this is a hard thing at some level. When you do get involved, that's what I'm telling you. You won't know, and you'll know what you're after, but you won't know things that I'm telling you until you do it. Everything else is just a bunch of talk until you start finding out what has to be done. And so you choose your energy and where your energy is spent as wisely as possible. And you'll know that. I'm just telling you advance. Make sure to plan for that. And in this regard, Phil Restino has set a course, and he's still on it. And those around him that are on it. And his complaint was that there's still, and even what he does, there's not that many to come to help. There's a few, and they are persistent, but there's not what we need is the people taking the problem by the horns and dealing with it. And getting over, and you see why what was Stephen was commenting to about this war and this game that we're in, and I've referred to it as well. We get ourselves in the last inch line, and we're going to stand them up. But be careful not to get too wrapped up in that game. That there is no spoon, folks. This is the interesting point. If you don't understand, if you don't listen to what I'm saying, and I'm not, I have to admit, I'm not that organized in my presentation so that you might know. You really have to listen closely to what I say. Now we can make these analogies so that we speak to a general sense of things, but there's very specific things that are going on, and also, and don't miss the point, we're not really in the game. There is no spoon. There's someone that wants you to believe there's a spoon, and I've told you. The counter to that, to understand that, what I'm saying, is I tell you, you do not bring forward a question. You don't bring an issue into matter. You've researched the position substantially enough that there is no counter to what you bring. And what you bring is the cause to a harm that has no excuse. There is no spoon. There's no game. You're not even in it. What they want you to do is believe you're in the game. And for our purposes of general discussion, we can use those as an analogy to give ourselves that fighting spirit, but don't get lost in the analogies and don't think that they're actually the thing that we need to do. It's the example we have to give ourselves in order to get active, to evolutionarily engage, as I have seen we need to do. We can't stay static, and we can't use old methods to something that's the type of foe you'll find that we are up against no matter where you look, it seems. And it's really quite amazing how consistent this foe responds. It is, in a way, a natural creature, but it's this transparent natural thing that's an oppression to everybody. And so enough, I guess, there. Thank you very much to all y'all that have been supporting this broadcast, and not to, again, Grimner, again, you are just a big core about how that works. And I say little about the Minds.com and Grimner's support. I don't know, I haven't really went back and looked for a few weeks, but when he puts up a post, it gets hundreds and hundreds, if not 1,000 or so views. So this is coverage that we haven't had before. All of y'all are setting it up. We're slowly getting this broadcast message back to the numbers it was when I was on an integrated network with many, many hosts that cause people to show up. I don't know what their reasons for showing up were sometimes, but they showed up nonetheless. And I don't know if they were any more active than they are today. But again, as Phil Restino has been doing since 2006 by his statements, tens of thousands of packets of 9/11 truth as he sees it, and as there is to be seen. Never forget what they'll do to us. He has been just sticking by his method and just getting the word out. It's one of the things that seemingly we have to do. It's no different than we're told in advertising. You have to continue to get the word out over and over and over. For some reason, the little creatures that we are really dense to something less. And as I happen to make and thanking you all for what you've been doing, and I know I'm spending quite a bit of time here, but I think it's important. And for those of you that have not heard this broadcast or half listen, you really have to listen through the whole broadcast as I go. I wind so many threads together, not really on purpose, but they're there to be wound. They're there to braid the rope, if you will, to show you exactly how all these things work, and they do work together. And you have to really listen for a while to understand that, and through a whole broadcast, I think I get through most of it, even though I have tabs left over. You really have to pull this all together. You have to see this is an integrated affront, an attack, an integrated destructive method, and you can jump in on any part of it anywhere you want. And that's why I say we have it in our hands to do this. I want to get over to thank someone I just found just by looking for other information, folks. I'm just like you on my own information. I don't know what I tell myself. I don't know what I tell you. But the blogcaster is out there, and people responding to that is out there, and I get to research for my own information. I said, I know I talked about that. I know I talked about, what did I do? I don't even remember. So I got to go search the internet for my own stuff, and I happened to find another website that posts the broadcast, and just last week's got put up. I happened to find that. It's called deprogram.org, and I thank you very much for what you do if you're listening in. I appreciate all the support wherever we can get the broadcast out and the information. Just the fact of getting our mind set better. In fact, I was just hearing, be careful not to, I've been talking to you, and I don't want to jump onto that, but what did I say? We really have to look past a lot of the information that we're getting, and be careful not to be persuaded by those we have faith in. And I say that even for myself. That's why I want you to read the black and white. Go read those things. Not the news, not the fake news, not the news you can't figure. I'm talking about what the authority, the power, the authorita wants to beat you down with. Go look at what they're saying. That's the core information. That will tell you where it's all going, and it also gives you the point of how you're going to defeat it. I've found that in about, I think, every place. I don't know that I've been not able to find their Achilles heel, this plan of destruction against us. And this is historic and over generations, beyond the mind of man almost, this thing. But appreciate deprogram.org, DE-program, for listing the broadcast. All they are, they just listed the broadcast and referred to Real Liberty Media. More places for people to see. So before I move on, I do want to get interesting. There are things in the world that interest me a lot more than the oppression of what man does against man under the cover of peace on earth. Don't miss the methods right there, folks, is how this works. Give you all the warm and fuzzy. But there's some pretty interesting things going on, and something that I've never seen before and hadn't been able to visualize at all. I got the Earthquake 3D I throw up, and it's the free version, so I don't get all the bells and whistles, but it gives me something to look at, as I used to keep much closer track to earthquakes on the Earth a long time ago. Again, as I've developed my own view of what could be happening. But there was an interesting thing that happened in earthquakes here, right near the North Pole, probably as close as I've ever seen an earthquake, right at the top of the Earth. Went off, a bunch of them actually, very close to 6.0 happened. Didn't go very far, which is always an interesting thing to me. 10 kilometers, about 6 miles or so, 7 miles deep, but Right near. I don't think I've ever seen a closer series of earthquakes. Right at the top, and there was even responded to, I think, by Ben Davidson of the Real Twitter. He's got at the Real SOS, Suspicious Observers. He's been driving that whole thing. He responded with this thing. He hadn't seen that either. Apparently, he said they're getting bigger. They did go to 6.0. I thought that was really fascinating. And so I had to ask him whether or not, when I look at it, whether or not the creature was about to hatch, folks. Is there something pecking its way out from the center of the earth? And do we now qualify and prove that the earth was hollow, except for the little creature that the earth was used to as the egg for the next generation of whatever creature infected us? Touching on the idea of things we don't know about, and the things that I keep telling you that we have to look through, is the lie that's used by all those that want to gain your buy-in on this system, a global system of governance and control, completely disregarding, disrespecting your property rights, which means they disrespect you in the first instance. That we have another proof of what I've been telling you. I want to relate it back over to the week before, where I talked to you about the 30,000 cell lines, the mutant or the immortal cells. Think about that too, how they call these immortal. These cells in your body that are not killable. And that's kind of an interesting thing in the sci-fi side, if you want to go there, and maybe be careful of what they might be messing with. But things of the problem of finding out your cell lines are all contaminated, and you're relying upon so-called drugs or whatever, pharmaceuticals to make policy and make regulations for people and support industries that make huge profits around things. The next week comes up in very similar admission. And it has to do with the climate. And you may think, oh, climate change poo-poo, that folks, these people are going to use this method to destroy you. And you don't forget about the carbon tax point. This is how they start getting you, and you haven't figured out, you don't listen behind the woodshed closely enough to figure out you're not part of that game and how to identify that. So those of you that are still whining about being subject, you got to listen a little closer to what I've been telling you and how these people are setting this up around you and how they're going to parasitically feed from you. But we find out the whole and the entirety of what you think climate change is based on is not really foundational at all, as we've been saying over and over, not by just an opinion and a flippant response. I mean by really looking at the subject matter. It's been now reported climate change may be vastly underestimated due to ocean temperature miscalculations. So here was the same thing. Your miscalculations are your your unknown cell lines. It's a factor in your whole thesis. But remember, climate change is defined as something other than actual science, even the fraudulent one. What I can't remember quite how I figured it out. It's something. It's a hypothesis on a statistical relationship on something that hasn't been proven. It starts out all wrong. But here they're actually saying, even once you get past that point, if you give that to them, their temperature calculations are all wrong. They're all wrong, folks. They're trying to establish this power against you on all wrong to begin with. Now here's a wrong that you need to make right for those of you that are into it. Don't just blab about it. Pull this stuff together. Scientists have discovered a flaw in the method. Remember, we sued the method by which they bring this away. Here it is, the method used to measure past ocean temperatures, which, if correct, they're telling you everything in this first paragraph. If correct, that's even a question. It could mean we have underestimated the rate of climate change over the past 100 million years. Well, did you miss two more? You think we've actually measured over the 100 million years? Remember, even ice core stuff that we measured, they found out is improper. But did you miss the real trick there? They have we've underestimated the rate of climate change. How could you estimate it at all? How do you know if you're over or underestimating? What is your use of this word, underestimate? What's the adjective science added onto estimated on top of it? This paragraph is critical, a critical observation of how they take you out, of how you can be blind and transparent to the fraud right in your face. They're actually trying to support that they can find the actual estimate. And they talk about, again, the second paragraph, they're telling you about how this thing is. We sued to enjoin a method that they bring on this thing, and it's all ends up tying in this regard to sustainable development. The carbon tax, this energy fraud, clean energy, which isn't. I hear a whole city is going to go from 90% coal to so-called clean energy by 2035. I think it's in Ohio, St. Louis maybe. These people haven't even looked into the future, and they're doing all this discussion and they're going to bring in an issue about so-called clean energy. It's not clean, but they'll say it is. I've gone through all this before on this, and then this story pops up that they don't even have the right calculations to even understand this thing. Just as I've said before, it's a very complex system, and it runs all by itself. Isn't that how far away we are from actually seeing it? Again, want to point out, it's admitted no different than those cell line stories that we had last week that says that they don't even know. They've based all their information, they based all their regulations, they based all the drugs, the products they give you on improper, no science essentially, not able to be reproducible. Boy, that's right in this line with this story, that climate change as a method is not reproducible, and they tell you every week. And then they try to sell you that they might be able to, even though they don't even have the right to use the words in the first paragraph here. And they'll go on now and set up a whole story for you to buy into on this report, and not to, well, I'll just leave it there. You can go ahead and keep buying in, or you can step back and say, wait a minute, this whole thing is, that your whole reality is not. Like I said before in a further past broadcast, it's not what experts say. It's reality. And so shame be on me for insisting maybe that London didn't look past the problem when they, at the same week this comes out, this Miscalculations admission comes out, London introduces carbon T-charge tax on diesel and older petrol vehicles. So this is a real thing, folks. It's coming out. They're going to do a carbon tax. It ends up being this T-charge. I thought maybe they should have a P charge. If the Parliament was truly interested in stopping global warming, the hot air on Parliament, that issues based on even just this stuff, should be curbed and taxed. And we should be taxing Parliament and looking at the harm that the Parliament is causing to global warming with all the hot air that comes out of that government as well as others. So this is no joke what they're doing. London introduces the carbon T-charge tax. Part of the plan to begin phasing out gas and diesel car sales over the next 3 decades, drivers of diesel vehicles and older petrol cars in the UK will now face a tax called the T-charge for driving into the financial district and parts of West London. Now, wow, that was a whole other thing. The city of London is taking the lead. That's the world of the finances that's the crown, if you will, for the Londoners. And they are, by hook, line, and sinker, being forced into all of this. And it's a fraud. And until you step up and call it out on the points of the fraud instead of what your thoughts about it are, these people are going to get it. And because I don't know the UK laws for driving, I do know they have the United States laws for a highway comes from the right to use the highways as a matter of right. I know that it comes from the same source. I don't know why you wouldn't use the same imposition. Well, it's not imposition. It's the assertion of the right against the imposition for what they call driving. I assume this term, and it could be a wrong assumption, that globally driving is the same thing. It's the commerce of using the road upon the roads. It's the business on a roadway, not the ones that even the people of England had as a matter of right, that the king granted away. That's recognized. So again, this is about a T-charge into the financial district for driving, which I would have to say, if you look closely, you'll find it's related to commerce again. And until you get this straight, you're not going to understand how all this back it up to the sustainable development. Remember the thing that the Bar Association globally is to promote, where it can get away with it, that if you don't start making this distinction, your life will be sucked away. And the commerce system works to control the production, and no one's figured this out yet. And they're going to try and get rid of these petrol-using cars on no basis of no actual science, no math, no nothing. They're going to get you to do it, and they're going to tell you that they can do it with electric cars. Well, I'm not so sure. For as much of a fan as I have been for electric cars for about near ever as I can conceive of my memory of wanting to get involved, I can't see it happening, folks. You're going to have to get that energy from somewhere. We haven't got it, to my chagrin, over all these years as well. But this is no joke. It used to be that we could see 2 years into the future by looking at Britain from the United States to see what was coming. And I've told you, man, that time has gotten down to well within 6 months. Isn't it the fact that we're not now? I think maybe the United States is starting to lead the charge, notwithstanding Trump's position. California seeks a ban on fossil fuel cars, laying the groundwork to ban humans from the road. And this is what you see now, the technocratic future of your cars driving themselves, whatever they think that's going to do, and you're going to be controlled in where you go and how you move and all this other stuff. This is no joke. You can continue to look at this stuff and let it go past, or you can say, wait a minute now, I have a right to use I have the right of use of the highways as a matter of right, and I'm not going to allow these plunderers to steal that from me. And it's not that hard of an argument either. And I don't use when I'm doing this thing. And we're going to have we're having another case coming up here as we move through the equity remedies. We're going to see how the government's going to respond to that as an estoppel against their own fiduciary duty to not infringe upon that right of use of the highway. Did I say right to drive? No, I said right of use of the highway. It's as a matter of right as well. And you have to see how this is, and there's statutes. When you look around, you'll see all the statutes speak to it. What I've told you and what's been missing a lot of times, people do not know they have to create the alternative reality that they exist in relative to that legal or commercial regulable reality that is so pervasive. And that's a big nugget right there for all of y'all. And this is where our difference for people, the men and women, are different and distinct in this regard, and it can be shown very easily. I've explained in parts how I do it. I've done it more and more as I feel you all are listening now. You have better ears to hear. I've been offering more things for that, but I offer it in a way, if you will, that isn't really the line-by-line answer to make you think you have a silver bullet. And also, you have to realize the battlefield America is now the battle of censorship. I've said I'll be interested to see how long we're able to continue to give you the right information and not be censored out. You think this is not a tactic and a strategy on my part? You're not really thinking close enough. This is a serious issue, what I say here. There's a way to approach this stuff, and I'm going to be interested to see when it finally reaches to the right people who have the buttons against y'all. And then that's why we're hitting up things like Minds and going to BitChute and going to any other platform just to be able to keep the word viable. And that said, that as I think about it, and I have been able to put no more time into it, archive.org is becoming a more viable thing. It's outside up there in Kanukistan. I now know they have 2 types of server farms, I think. That's where all this stuff could be put, so that we don't, at least that, we have one more place that's more, at least fortified in their intention to keep information from being shut down. So this is a real war, real battle. There's some I haven't thought too deeply about exactly a real strategic or tactical strategy for behind the woodshed, but as I think about and conceive, this is how this thing works. It's part of what I do here. It's part of the reality of what we're up against, and you're watching the censorship and decimation of whatever information. And believe me, a lot of what I see that's being complained of and cut, I don't necessarily believe in a lot of what I see there either. The point is that just the fact of the censorship at all I'm not now left to look at someone's work and make my decision one way or another. I'm not able to listen for the things that are said that are really genius within someone's insanity to bring on as my own. I'm not able. I'm not able to then avoid those that would be caustic or deadly to me. And you're watching how powerful the communication is, and that's only because the people who are doing that know it can step up into action. It has nothing to do with what you're saying. It has nothing to do with what I'm saying. Until you take what I'm saying and put it in application and then learn the nuances and the difficulties and the trials and tribulations of that and work that through and then persist again and continuing, you won't understand what exactly it is that is the terror of those that would sit even as do-gooders in their own mind. You have to think about what is going on. And this is why don't judge people too much. They might actually think they're doing you a favor. And this is where they try to blow this climate change nonsense up. Oh, we're helping the public. We got to think ahead because there's no one thinking about this problem. And I would think ahead. Remember, there's no sense to cause a problem if we can avoid it, if it is a problem. Our problem isn't climate change necessarily. That's going to be, I haven't found it coming, the climate so-called, the actual climate, not the one they fabricated. I haven't seen it step outside of its oscillation and variability in all of the history that even our faulty science can look back and see. We have not come outside of the constraints of that variability, ever. Not now, and we're a long way from going to either the top or the bottom. Now, we are maybe looking to go down, but you better prepare for that too. I've talked about all that. But until we get a handle on reality, these do-gooders are going to win the day because we just think, oh, they're do-gooders, and we don't have another word in our mouth to say, wait a minute, that do-gooderness is actually a crime against us. So California is already seeking to ban fossil fuel cars, as now they are attempting to consider or do in the city of London. That's the city of your world financial affairs, or partly so. Don't underestimate the connections to this. Well, we're talking about not being able to understand and being ignorant or the clueless. And I find that broadcast on the YouTube, at least, doesn't have many people clicking on it. The ignorant versus the clueless. Yeah, not many people want to go to that one. So I think that's pretty an interesting tell to me. But why might this all be? What's the danger in the country, and how is this all coming on to us? We'll get another report. England's already gone to this carbon tax. It's a fraud. California jumps to it, and a report comes up to tell us maybe why it's able to come forward. And this puts even more burden on those of us that see to get out and do something. Census Bureau, remember, Census Bureau is part of commerce, notwithstanding that 44.6% in California don't speak English at home. I thought that was a raving review. Good, folks. I mean, we don't live in England in America. We should be speaking American, right? So it's great that 44.6% don't speak the English. The problem is those other ones that are speaking the English, that would accept something like this T-tax right there in California, may be our problem. And by the way, Texas is not out of it. 35% don't speak English. 34%. Congratulations to those not speaking English in America. Speak the English, folks. Don't speak American. Don't speak the English. And so this is looking like this is our problem. We don't even speak our own language. We don't speak our own laws. We aren't protective of them, and neither is the government at all. And we haven't held that condition to be that way. No, we've accepted all these other things that would actually embrace lunacy and not far forward thinking. Have you really thought about how you're going to power the batteries that are in an electric car, folks? Have you really thought about that? We've gone a little bit through that in Behind the Woodshed. Has anybody really sat back and thought about that? And when you do, you're going to find out that's like an impossibility at this point. There's just the way energy has to be utilized and done and transferred, and the losses that are involved. We're not in that perfect sphere that this could even be possible. And yet we go off on these nonsenses. So 44% in California don't speak the English. And that's great. I hope you're speaking American. But you know what that's talking about there, folks. They're talking about we don't have a communication set that understands the finer points of what we were supposed to keep in America. We're embracing the English. And this became a theme unbeknownst to me this last week. These connections to the England and English again, and there's a whole other thought about getting there. And when you go that way in the international side, you're going to end up over there. Don't forget that the Vatican sits right behind this. And doesn't the Vatican support, to no minimum level, to every extenuation, sustainable development? Doesn't it accept that you should live in austerity? Doesn't it accept that you should live in perpetual sustainable debt? Doesn't it accept all these things? Yes. So it started to become the England should be a hub of information this week. Started to develop itself, and I didn't notice it till last night. I started throwing things up into the tabs to show that we've got another story developed over the last week, and it is focusing somewhat on England, but it also extenuates out to the ill of the world at this point. Really completely, as I've been explaining as well. But now, out of their own words and by a different discussion, out this week, along with their carbon tax, through a T-tax, so-called, they want to put this crime against humanity on a global scale, and they're going to start out there in the financial center, the same center that's going to rule your life in debt, and you accept it. So don't say, oh, that's just sitting out there and can't hurt me. You're running in it right now. We talked about it last week. All these things are pretty integrated. We tie them into each week. But here was a very interesting discussion that was on a video, and I just want to read more of what it said from the video, not let you hear it. Probably technically a little more difficult, I suppose, potential problems. But it says the very first sentence was a fascinating admission to me. The UK proud of establishing Israel, said Theresa May. So the Prime Minister is making a very large statement, I think, that maybe got missed. The British Prime Minister says her country is proud of the role it has played in the creation of Israel, referring to the notorious Balfour Declaration. Now, I find it very interesting. We take on the English. We're supposed to be separate in the United States. We're supposed to jump across the pond and be independent. We kept the English language, and we stopped speaking the American. And we see more than half of our population now doesn't even speak the English, but we can make a joke about it, not about speaking the American and not the English, but we know better. And here comes this statement out of England that says that the British was proud of its role it played in the creation of Israel. And it references the Balfour Declaration. Now, this is not unknown to us that read. I'm pointing out, you always listen very carefully when there's an admission or a confession. This is not, as I responded, not necessarily true, then, that the Israelis, so-called, are making an actual ancestral claim, is it? And it's just my main problem with this whole and entire thing. They've just admitted Israel, this idea, is a creation. It wasn't an ancestral claim that they were helping to promote. It's an excuse to cause something to happen. I hope you appreciate this point, the finer point. This ends up running the thread through this week. That Israel is essentially a colonial imperialization, oppression, and occupation of the Semites themselves. A creation, not an ancestral claim. This is, to me, critical to have heard. Again, we can have our ideas about things and we can have our opinions, but when you hear them talk about this, that they were in the power to do what they've done, and it was only let's put it this way, it's another weapon. for whatever purposes they needed in the creation of that weapon. Becomes this, as we'll even see at the end, if hopefully I get there, becomes this gorilla in the room they actually mention at the very end of all this week. So this experiment, this colonialization, this imperialism, this occupation, this non-ancestral claim created by a power in the world in league with other powers, no doubt, and we'll see this, and it's all before us. This is not even a hard one to go through. We've heard about it. I don't know why actually the news is what it is. It's just admission and confession by the perpetrators of crimes globally. The thing that disgusts me so much about us. We don't say boo about it coming on to Halloween even. This little imperial occupation, the creation of Britain, is now in the news as well, selling millions of dollars of military equipment to Burma during ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya Muslims. Israel has been accused of continuing to sell military equipment to the Burmese military, even as it faced accusations of war crimes against minority Rohingya Muslims. War crimes, folks. What did I tell you about before? Israel, so-called Israel. There's no state here, folks. This is a creation of Britain and its gang members. This little pipsqueak of a place is a surrogate for weapons productions to do what? Ethnic cleansing. This is no different than apartheid. This is the thing that if you say this, you get stomped on because I guess it's really the truth. Now, where does a pipsqueak of a place, it's not even a state, but they just call it that doesn't have the land over which it uses to do this equipment, how does it have the right to sell military equipment at all in the world? Have you tried doing that? And have you seen anybody that tries, let alone just dealing in weapons across the international border? Do you see what happens to people? Becomes a very special view in my mind about how this works, given the direct admission now that Israel is simply a creation of Britain. Its role in the creation. Again, there's a thing going on. And find it very interesting that within the same week, and almost convoluting, and also the story, and I wasn't going to get too much into it at all, was the JFK files release, and the question about that, the last 200 documents not coming in. I don't know about all that. I've been waiting all my life to want to see the records and didn't know at the time I was waiting, okay, they're going to do this for a good reason. We're not going to see, but in 50 years we'll get to see, and if any of us are still living, we'll get to see. And then coming in through the 90s and 2000s and realizing we ain't going to get to see. This is all just an ongoing scam against us completely. The Brits are all involved always with the United States and their creation. So what is this Israel making equipment for ethnic cleansing, their apartheid, their abilities to go through the world and have a say at all for changing countries, like with regime change? Comes out the JFK files, and we were looking for the, okay, who kind of, give us some more clarity on how this story rolls out. We don't really agree with the Commission's report like we haven't agreed with any report. But now we have inside, we already know that there's not going to be the fullness of this. As a collateral piece of information, not about the assassination of JFK, but with the records that have been kept, we get this little view about the issues surrounding the JFK matter. From 1963, an informant advising the Chicago office that subject was member of an anti-Castro Cuban group. Subject allegedly approached informant to provide machine guns for Cuban Rev. 112163. Subject allegedly told informant, quote, "We now have plenty of money. Our new backers are Jews. As soon as we or they take care of Kennedy," subject expressed favorable attitude toward LBJ, is a document you can get. I got a link over to theminds.com. One guy he actually put the thing in red. Piece of information, has where you can read it on the internet. It's part of that release. It's not pinning the blame on anybody about JFK, but it is an interesting insight from an informant involved with this. Why would these people even come up, these so-called Jews? I don't even like to refer to them as Jews because I think they're poseurs, actually. That's a problem to begin with. It's like buying in that you can underestimate climate change calculations when you don't even have the basis for it to begin with. How do you know what up or down on what that is? That we have indication that there was some Jewish backing, so-called Jews backing the Cuban anti-Castro group. Neither here nor there on how that is. We now see there was some information and available that now brings this Israeli connection right into vogue, which is one of the theories that people have been working on was happening regarding the assassination itself. So this brings on Britain is an ally, is a creator of Israel, and we know it was the United States that did it. We look in the world to see what it's being used for and as a tool. We heard that no one wants to talk about the nuclear problem with Israel. How is this little state not only being able to make weapons and sell them to genocidal governments, but how are they able to maintain the possession of the bomb, the nuclear bomb? How do they get this uranium? How are they able when no one else is supposed to be able to have this, and they aren't even a state? No other state's supposed to be messing with. Look at what they're doing in North Korea over this. And yet this gorilla in the room called Israel, the creation, the role played by Britain in the creation of this weapon called Israel. We start to understand and consider if it's been playing a part in the history of the world, the United States, to the point where it may have taken out a president. What else is available to these people? What won't they do? And we don't have an upper limit. We have to necessarily look at the nuclear problem. And another article came up, and I think this came from Gary L. As I was looking at just a stream of stuff came through, all of a sudden I said, oh, well, let's pick this and let's pull that out. Highly enriched uranium from the United States aid Israel's nuclear weapons program. See, everyone places it as a question, but we have proof of the fact that it isn't a question. We have proof of this weapon called Israel being the creation of Britain and its role with others, and its continuing disregard of everything we know as anything international, upstanding, diplomatic, to the point that they are considered occupiers in the land over people, oppressors, committing genocide there, and committing war crimes. And I touched on this with the fact of the Palestinian rock and gravel. As simple as this, folks, you can find this. The rock and gravel being stolen by the Israelis against the rights of the Palestinians was a war crime. It is a war crime. In fact, so much so, and so evidentiarily factual is that, we included that very story in a presentation coordination to the state of Oregon to I think it was the DEQ, and said, you can't do what you're doing, because what you're doing is not different than what, as a war crime, is what they're doing over there against the Palestinians that Israel is doing. That we are dealing with a bunch of people that don't matter, they don't care. They have no scruple about being peace in the world, but they are the created tool and weapon to advance everything contrary to peace on earth. The question comes out, did highly enriched uranium from the United States aid Israel's nuclear weapons program? At the same time that we're looking at things about Russia getting the HEU from Mueller, when we find out the fact of that was an internal law enforcement provision. They're trying to keep track of who's stealing the high enriched uranium, and Russia was given a sample to test to see if it was the same stuff stolen from them. No, nobody, it's crickets on this. The people that profess to be the new alt-right news people won't answer that point to make that not an object of our fancy, and look more critically at more important information. Which shows me that, again, as I said in the Twitter, we're not alt-left and we're not alt-right. We're behind the woodshed. It's a totally different condition And it's where you're looking at the wrong you need to make right, and you know the facts of your case, and you're pressing forward. This has been an ongoing wound in the world, this thing called Israel. We now hear that it's a creation of the role of which was participated by Britain, actually the English, the government. And upon the question, and this is the thing, everyone makes a question. It's like writing a fiction about a reality so that you can always give the plausible deniability. Oh, it was just a story. No one wants to tell the truth straight up because they'll be whacked or oppressed or given some child porn on their equipment or whatever nasty thing that they need to do, because they can hack everywhere now. They can be any place. They can, like Israel said, they told us they can make your DNA someplace. So why hasn't then this concentrated evil been outed to this point? Has to be a big notice to you. The UN will not out this. Has to be a big notice to you. It's a tool of the UN as well. It's a tool of constraining the world to the construct that's coming. It's like, as I've been telling you, it has all the same roots. But I put down the question in a Twitter response about the question of whether or not they did highly enriched uranium from the United States aid Israel's nuclear weapons program. I responded, well, something did, and then I provided a link to someone on Twitter who provided the document that said from the United States government, United States State Department, that regarding Syria and Assad, that bringing down Assad, that's regime change, remember that term, don't forget about that, that comes up poignant pretty quick. Bringing down Assad, I'm reading right from the document as printed as an image from Twitter. I guess it could be the lie, I guess it could be a setup, I don't know, I haven't seen the original. I'm going to take this as face value on what it says, because it fits perfectly with what we watch and witness in the world. The bringing down Assad would not only, this is from the State Department now, get this, the United States is involved. Bringing down Assad would not only be massive boon to Israel's security, it would also ease Israel's understandable fear of losing its nuclear monopoly. It would also ease Israel's understandable fear of losing its nuclear monopoly. So however they got it, they have a nuclear monopoly in the Middle East. The creation, the role of which was part of England to do in making and creating Israel, not as an ancient claim of land, as a weapon. I hope you're understanding and getting this point. I know lots of people talk about the Jews. I'm not talking about the Jews. I'm talking about a weapon that a bunch of people have gotten together to use to destroy the world. It's one of the weapons. And it's part of the hypocrisy you see. It's the evidence right before us that we tend to make even transparent to ourselves. Partly drives me a little bit nuts, but there's not much I can do about that. I do not identify the Jews as a people. I don't think there hasn't been DNA proof one that that's a fact. What we do now agree to is whatever you call yourself over in Israel and you participate in what that is doing, you are a creation, not an existence prior. You're a creation subsequent. I almost don't need to hear more about that story. And what I do now start looking at is who is not stopping this experiment, this weapon of world war. A question comes out long time ago I never got to on the tabs. I remembered it, brought it up. This becomes relevant till today. In the IsraeLie. Says, I spoke recently at a conference of Americans War Party, where afterward an elderly gentleman came up to me and asked, quote, why doesn't anyone ever speak honestly about the 600-pound gorilla in the room? Nobody has mentioned Israel in this conference, and we all know it's American Jews with all their money and power who are supporting every war in the Middle East for Netanyahu. Shouldn't we start calling them out and not letting them get away with it? So this was a publication that was made a long time ago, and there was already an update to it. Hey, broach the idea of why isn't anybody speaking about this 600-pound gorilla? My first observation on all that, why are you even identifying it as a gorilla and not the creation of it, that Britain had a role in making up? Why aren't we addressing that? It's really, again, there's no spoon, remember? There is no real 800-pound gorilla. There's a crime, and it's not an argument. You either arrest it or you become the accessory to the crime against you, or as a principal accessory. Update on that story was, on the morning of September 21st, Phil Giraldi was fired over the phone by the American Conservative, the publication, where he had been a regular contributor for 14 years. He was told that, quote, American Jews are driving American wars, the title of the article, was unacceptable. The TAC, the American Conservative Management and Board, appear to have forgotten that the magazine was launched with an article by founder Pat Buchanan entitled Whose War?, which largely made the same claims that Giraldi made about the Jewish push for another war in the case with Iraq. Buchanan was vilified and denounced as an anti-Semite by many of the people who are now similarly attacking Giraldi. And I see the word anti-Semite, and I don't have to think no more. That's another one of those words that's been used to, again, put a title on someone, call you a name, defame you right in front of everybody. That's a lie. And that people accept it. And don't challenge the assertion of that without a true definition of what it is. Because the Semite was a whole bunch of peoples, if I can say that. And there's really no way to be anti-Semite that way. Unless you're talking about also being anti-Arab. And please do not get lost in the point that I may be embracing any one of these people. They are who they are, or ought to be what they do, and they have the right to do that. I'm not here to embrace anyone for anything. I don't even know if I have enough awareness to be able to. I do know when I meet with people from other cultures than my own, it's very interesting to me. I really enjoy the engagement. I enjoy the new perspective. I've really always enjoyed all that. But at the point that it becomes a politics and people start dying, that the words become weapons, I'm not up with that. And so we have the name, the vilification, the name-calling. I understand there's some political connections to people like Buchanan or whomever and these publications. The point is we look through that to see people are expressing a question and they're getting attacked by a creation, not a natural consequence of history. What is this censorship, as I started talking about as we got into the beginning of the broadcast, this censorship that caused me to start looking, how are we going to position ourselves, how do we position ourselves in order to kind of walk through, notwithstanding the knife of the editor, wherever you will be, do you survive? Can you survive it? And I think you can. And we'll see how far that goes. But this knife that's cutting so deep attacks people who ask open questions on something we now hear from the Prime Minister of Britain. It's really not what it even claims for. The creation isn't even what it claims for itself. Again, it's an excuse. We're seeing the miscalculation in our agreement with what we've been told. And all these things, these little dots of connection come up with the JFK. Who would have I would have never thought about that connection, although you can't deny it. Not that I thought about it, but who would have understood that we could see the JFK files would turn up a connection to Jewish banking, supporting arms to kill people, to overthrow the regime, make regime changes wherever. Is, I think, the takeaway point for me. Not that we can prove anything really happened, but we look at the history since then, and boy, this it's connected. These dots are connected in spades. Now, relative to the JFK things, I was, since, we started to find out that the government was just this big crook, we didn't really realize. We thought the better of it. We always want to give it, Americans are pretty forgiving that way. They want to think better of you. You're really not judgmental for all the nonsense we hear now about what racism or I don't even know all the terms, social justice, equality, all that nonsense stuff. All that's fabricated to cause more division. All the dots that we now can connect and not be actually underneath our own lie that we're actually going to be told a thing. I still wanted to know what this JFK issue with all this issuance now and the 200 pages that weren't going to be, and then we heard that they're all redacted. I said, I had asked on Twitter, a rhetorical question, I'm sure, people expect to ever know the truth about the JFK from government? Still? Are we really still sitting in that moment that we think that these commissions are going to tell us anything that is going to give us the power that we need to make observation that we could, in fact, be the government of, by, and for the people? The fact that we're not today should be a large clue. Now, I responded in that way that people would expect, how could they expect to get something out of the JFK files on a question that Gary L. posed or presented was not a question more than a video he posed about Michael Collins Piper, who, in a book written a while back on an older video, was explaining, I think the book was called Final Judgment, and explaining that there's a connection to Mossad in the JFK thing, and how it all worked out, who the players were. I haven't heard anybody come out, and I couldn't find anybody denouncing his organization structure on how this thing was put together, which, when you step back now and look at that one cable from the State Department, and you look at what's going on, and you hear the British Prime Minister saying this is a creation, in fact, it starts to make a dot. Michael Collins Piper may have been onto something. I say may. I'm to the point where I'm not there seeing it for myself, and even then, I wonder about my own witness, but I'm here to understand that there's some dots to connect. And if I hadn't done what I'd done over the last 30 years, independent, non-dependent on anybody else's opinions, on how I found and researched to come to what I'm doing, which I think still is unique, to this day is still unique, I do believe, and haven't found anybody that can match the doing of what goes on, that is now what has to happen. And I'm pausing on what to think about that. The comprehensive nature of what I've learned we need to do is not matched, I don't think, by anyone. That when I come through my experience and I see the suggestions made by someone like Michael Collins Piper on how he made the connections, and he admits he can't prove it, we do have to take an inference from the combined information. And this is where I told you, this is where we get into the possibilities and probabilities, and you pick categories, you stick them in your mind, you just watch those, you just tend to those as that, and you continue to build the evidence in those categories. And at some point, it starts to weigh. It's not just beyond a reasonable doubt. There's different standards to be able to measure stuff. There's reasonable belief. There's something even higher than that. We can go through it. It's useless. You can go research that and know it yourself. But with this inability to expect that the government would actually give us any information, and the redactions, all under the cover of national security, and now we look at what Israel is and Britain did in creation and its role in creating this would all be covered under national security. What was another thing that I just started to think about, just not even a question more than rhetorical, just what monstrous truth is being obstructed under the pretense of national security that redaction of all this information wouldn't likely hide anyway? What are these people really covering? And so my mind goes to the absence of information that we hear, the omission to say certain things, the things you don't see. Again, it's this transparent fraud by omission that unless you understand the condition, you don't understand what the omissions could be, is a very subtle tool and weapon against us, against your powers of observation. And it becomes a ton of work to be able to be in all the places that they are. Why I say it takes all of us. It takes all of us in being honest with ourselves, with what the information is, reducing our specialty down to a nice, understandable nugget that we can take and we put it in the possibility category and we keep moving with it while we're doing something upon the problem. But the omissions of what's going on tend to tell us when we see it, or we haven't been told and now we find out that was an omission until we were disclosed those informations, correct? So the fraud of omission of non-disclosure prior is the things that you can anticipate is being used, has been used, or going to be used in the future. Another collateral piece of information comes out of the JFK files. Not about the assassination, which I tell you, I mean, I came through that time, I had my expectations, and those things kind of got beat out of me in the last 30 so years. But they were still, the little guy in me wanted to know about the world and a truth. And we're now realizing that's probably not going to happen, but there's still other truths coming out. JFK files, U.S. official plotted destruction of Cuban crops with biological agents. Now, this isn't about the assassination of Kennedy, but this comes out through the filing of the release of information. This is your FOIAs or your open records requests, things you won't know until you go do something to go find out. Now, my only observation, well, the one I want to convey here is as I've told you before over and over, if the United States government is going to go over with the rule of law and democracy to destroy governments and peoples and destroy their stuff, not look at anything, destroy international law, the concept of it. Again, there's no enforcement of it's just an understanding amongst people and nations, they're diplomats. And that's supposed to be working pretty good enough. It does seem to work good when it all works. And the problem I've told you is not when it all works. It's when it stops working. And here, United States is that definition of things not working. United States went extrajudicial back in, for sure, by 2010. An attorney, a bar member, justified. There's no rational justification for it, but justified going extrajudicial, which I told you was the destruction of the established government of the United States as you know it, or thought you knew it. That the JFK files tell us that the United States government was plotting a destruction of Cuban crops with biological agents, that they will do that to you. And they will do that to you in places you don't understand, and then they call the point up to the agency's reflection of the ability to bring products into the world that poison you over time. They're willing to go starve out the Cubans with biological agents. They're willing to do it to you. That story doesn't turn out any more than the 30s in Ukraine and the Soviets taking down Ukraine by killing all the farmers and enslaving the people and then starving them out for 2 or 3 years. No, they decided they're going to do it over time. The United States government was plotting to do this to Cuba. This government will do it to you. I remind you of going to read Title 50 and looking for all the exceptions to the United States government to be able to do so. Right out of the JK files, you can read JFK files. They're the JF and K, the Freedom Network files. You're being told some things in this that are not necessary. Don't keep your mind focused on the assassination. There might be some really smart people intelligent people to pull some stuff together and show us a different light for those that have the time to do so. But to me, as I said before, I think just seeing what they're doing about this and how long they can extend our attention span shows us how adept they are at keeping us ineffectual. We need to forget all that information, see the truth that we see, that this government called the United States and Britain and Israel, which is this thing that's not even a government, is willing to do to you. And they won't use any law, any scruple any morality at all to do it to you. As we move today, let's put it back, the JFK files told us that they were plotting and planning. This is not even new news. We knew all this. What I'm telling you is it's now we can't deny it, folks. The people here, we the people can't deny this. You can't stick your head in the bag, in your bucket of sand. You really can't be a cricket on the awareness this brings, not on this subject matter to do anything, but on the awareness this brings to us. That today, what's the reflection of that today? The fact that they'll use biological agents against you. As I've told you over and over, you see the WHO, not the OWL, not the rock group, but the WHO, the World Health Organization, the instrument arm of destruction for pandemics, the fabricated, man-made fabricated biological destruction for people through their, again, eugenics and other processes, their agenda. The leaders simulated an inevitable pandemic, and we're not ready. Did you hear about this? I didn't hear about this. The world is, and they say they're not making this too public, but the news breaks now after they've done a few. The world is not ready for an inevitable pandemic, according to the World Bank, after simulating 4 global outbreaks. Now, you wonder why the bank is actually doing this. You think the World Health Organization might try, or some neutral party. No, it's the financial center, the center of the universe for finances, which none of us are eliminating at this point. We're all part of it. They tested for this pandemic. Well, I told you pandemic is not epidemic. Pandemic, by the WHO, own definition, is essentially, if you look carefully at the definition, it's man-made. Its vector is people or humans. Essentially, they're doctors. You got to look very carefully at that definition. It's made-up definition on top of it. It's the new dictionary term. It's how you have to. I was having a discussion. I might want to go through that at some point in the future, maybe, maybe not. Talking about how we can use dictionary terms is fine, but as I've told you before, when you have more than one meaning in a term in a dictionary, you might as well look at that as a different jurisdictional use, the context of which is all key. So we can have many uses, many terms that don't mean anything from their beginnings. And it all depends. It's all jurisdictional specific. And if you don't have the mind to go understand how to go through that, you're going to miss another trick. Now, these people are making up the definition for what a pandemic is. It's not an epidemic. It means it's man-made. And they say it's inevitable. I'm telling you, that's the plan, folks. And their plan is our problem. In a series of 90-minute sessions, they put a lot of time on this, didn't they? 90 minutes, ministers from 12 countries, as well as the World Health Organization and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Folks, listen, it's all connected. There's nothing not connected, I think, at some point. I hope you all see that as well. You get this, folks. It's all integrated. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention tackled realistic, quote, realistic. Remember, climate change is realistic. Hypothetical. How do you have all this, folks? But this is how they do this. Hypothetical scenarios of deadly disease crossing borders, tracking news, and social media. Get the fact of that. Understand how they're going about doing this. Understand silent weapons for quiet wars. It's almost all right here, what I've been talking to you about. They are planning the inevitable. A man-made, created biological attack, which the United States is now, we got evidence from the JFK files, they had planned to do against the people of Cuba. I just find it fascinating how these stories roll out, just to tell us, if you know what you're looking for, what they're telling us. It is inevitable because it's the plan. And we're going to sit back as crickets. As I think I commented to Gary, we were talking about gene modification and the fact of there was a criticism that the scientists were saying we're not embracing the GMOs that could stop the fungus. And I said, well, it's not that the people are fighting that. They don't like the unknown proteins, at least not knowing about the unknown proteins that are being created. And then Gary L. came on and said there's even more. There's more to say. Yeah, there absolutely is a whole lot more behind this. But see, they live in these hypothetical scenarios, and they do the law about what they think they know, all based in the so-called science that isn't anything such, because they find out they're miscalculating. But they're planning, folks, on an inevitable pandemic. I want you to be aware of that. And this is all backed up. Again, it's not new news. We were told governments will kill people. Governments themselves are weapons of mass destruction. Israel, the creation part of the role played by Britain in the creation of Israel, is a weapon. It's created as some form of kind of a government that is a destructive force in the world. And till we understand that and put that creature back in its box, and I think the United States has the example, not what you see today, but as I see it through the land disposal obligations and duties of what America is, we're not going to be able to see it, and we're not going to get to the next step. So the United States is now known that they were thinking, contrary to all international law, again, a long time before they told us in 2010 that they were going to throw out international law, when they said they weren't even going to listen to Libra Code, and then go extrajudicial, throw out their establishment, the establishment of the executive to be able to even exist. They threw that out, if you don't understand that part. These people have been utilizing these things for these these people under the color of government are the weapons of mass destruction. And they learn about what they do. They learn how to be very good at what they do. And blow me over with a feather. Right as coming onto the broadcast, a report comes out, a publication comes out saying, Asymmetrical Warfare Group, Lessons Learned from Modern Urban Operations from 1980 to Present. I thought couldn't be any more prescient an encapsulation of what we're talking about here. Modern urban operations. They've been telling us they're coming to the urban areas. We've talked about all this. None of this is news, I don't really think, at all. You know, everyone's talking about weather modification. Yeah, that was all happening since at least the 1923 or 28, somewhere in there. They were doing it even before, with the farmers that would go to people that could bring the rain. There's a different knowledge in the world about things, less technical. So weather modification isn't even the issue. It's really who's doing it and why. Getting on back to this, modern urban operation, you notice that you look at Syria, that's an example. I told you, look at over there as a mirror. They are willing to destroy your place, just crush it. And here's a report now looking at the history of urban warfare, which I thought was just prescient. It's Asymmetrical Warfare Group was doing an analysis. I just get down, I didn't read it yet. I read some of it, the beginning, and I thought I got down to the point where they talked about what were the references that they used. And the top two just kind of blew me away just a little bit relative to what I've been talking to you, what the British Prime Minister says and admits that Israel is a creation of Britain and the United States and whatever else is back there. But isn't the two first listed operations they look at in urban warfare relative to these two parties? British operations of Northern Ireland 1980 to 1998 and Israel Defense Force IDF operations in Lebanon 1982 to 2006 to tell you this is all organized in a certain way, and it references its own activity, and it tells you that it is, and this is no joke. That they have a plan. I've told you they analyze, they have data, they have to. I mean, just any war scenario tells you they have to be, if you do have a Genghis Khan horde that come on you, you better be able to defend yourself against it. You better be able to do it effectively, otherwise you don't exist. That's the truth of the world. There is no peace on earth. And there's so many ways to exploit that point and our aspirations to it. It's not funny. It's not funny at all. People die around this stuff. But I found it very interesting that British operations and Israel Defense Force operations were the two leading listed on this urban warfare analysis. Now I'm going to ask you all that are interested. I don't know that I'm going to have the time to do this myself, and it's not really in my scope either. I don't know that I'm even, maybe when I was 20. But I want you to know that this is a report. The U.S. Army thinks it's important. And you need to read about what they found, and you need to understand what they found and what their plan is on how they're going to deal with it, and also look very carefully to see what are the things that give them a ton of trouble. They'll be making new strides in those areas, but that may be what you may have. And I don't mean necessarily attached to an obvious war scenario, but apply it. Think back, let your mind rest, and look at what they show, and I'll suggest to you a couple of things I noticed. can be translated outside of the war scenario when you see other things are war weapons. That if you use what they found as the weakness, their weakness, you may be able to find an answer on how to reassert, notwithstanding this global war against all of mankind, you will be able to find out, have methods that, as I was telling you, you can address this problem without becoming into jeopardy, and you'll live to fight another day. And this is part of the thing I've been shown to say, to do, and we do, and still get something done, notwithstanding our vulnerabilities. Again, once you start to see the methods, they talked about the method in the calculations for the climate change. They're methods. These are the tactics they use against us. You start to identify them. I look for them, folks. I look for what they're doing. I look for their Achilles heel. I look for their weaknesses. I look for the admissions that they don't have an authority, to identify that it's them, and then how to take out the thing that is coming against people in the destruction. For me, so that you know that consistently, it's in land use, the property disposal side, it's in grant law, trusts, domestic treaties, it's in all this high-level law. International law plays a part of that. It's all this high-level law. It's not that you have to be versed in all of it. You just have to understand there's principles that underlie this that you can actually use. It's not that they don't recognize it. It's that you don't recognize your vulnerability and failures, and you step on the landmine, so to speak. But again, the collateral information gathered from this, connecting us back almost always to Britain and then Israel, as I started to see this, another collateral piece of information pops out. It doesn't explain how JFK was assassinated, but it does explain a little connection. And it's funny that Grimner almost had this at the almost same time. We must have thought about it. I saw the posting, I think, from Grimner on the Twitter, and he's responding into RLM chat about the same thing I'm talking about upon this title. English newspaper tipped off 25 minutes before the JFK assassination, documents show. Just from that title, what comes to mind, folks, is it's a continuous and continuing condition of dots that are consistent, certainly coincident. Whether or not we can tie the meaning, we don't know. But how many times do you want to see this same thing happening before you say, you know, there's a real meaning behind what's going on here? What comes to mind about being tipped off 25 minutes before a major thing in the world? I'm pausing for a moment, let you think. Think about it. What were you told about? Most of you who were involved and saw it, most of you live saw the videos that were running for days about this. It's the thing that changed America. What was given to us 25 minutes before it happened? About, approximately. None other than the British reporter giving us the fact of the destruction of Building 7. Happened to be the same time frame, and we saw the evidence that Building 7 was destroyed 25 minutes after they reported its destruction. How do you do that, folks? How do you do that? If you're not part of the plan, if you're not part of what's going on, and in a very intimate fashion. So when we have all this evidence going on about the governments themselves create other governments, so-called, to do the destruction and regime change and all these things, why would we even consider that the people who are doing this are actually the people themselves? But we get the use of this and how these people use this information, how they get to go their way, and how they twist the object to you and upon you. We have all the proof that the government's doing it. I mean, how many times have we heard the FBI setting up a mentally disabled people to so-called come up with a plan to go do a terrorist destruction, and the FBI actually set it up. And the government's cool with that. That we hear now, the United States widens surveillance to include homegrown violent extremists. Now, with the record I've just told you, what's homegrown more than the government itself as an extremist? What did we need to know more than the 2010 memo that said, we're going to not recognize international law any further, and we're going extrajudicial? How much more extreme do you need to go? We're going to create, with the Balfour Declaration, we're going to create this little weapon called Israel, and it's going to be our proxy weapon of choice for mass destruction. How much more extreme do we need to go that they now focus in on so-called homegrown violent extremists? Is in the news. And who's that going to be? This is the same problem going on and on. The U.S. government has broadened an interpretation. Did you hear it, folks? An interpretation. Who did the interpretation? Probably the same bar member type that said, oh, we get to go extrajudicial and destroy international law. You think? We don't get a handle on this and the people and stop being crickets about it. You're the accessory to the crime against you. The interpretation of which citizens, go look at that, can be subject to physical, isn't that a redundant statement? Citizens can be subject to physical and digital surveillance to include homegrown violent extremists. Folks, it's going to be a day, you're already seeing it on the internet, if they're going to censor your speech because it's hateful or racist or whatever they want, you're going to be pretty quickly put into the violent extremist category. Remember, they can just put the question of mental instability on you, and they can put a hold on you almost as long as they need to. And now we're back into fabricated licenses for people that are pretending to be psychiatrists, psychologists, pharma, doctors, and all this other stuff. It's a closed system of destruction against you. You don't even see it. So, here it comes, folks. They're now bringing it to us. Given we see the government's the one that's actually the extremist, this next story came out pretty interesting, and I'm not going to go too deep more than, remember, I've covered it in the Mandalay effect. A Las Vegas shooter's laptop missing its hard drive. Well, now, how is a hard drive missing from a guy who was found dead in the pictures, and unless he hid it before? I guess that's the story they're trying to spin. He hid it and they can't find it. What got me was the end of the story. They give you a whole list. I didn't know this, how much I pay attention. Did you know in 2007 the Virginia Tech shooter, Cho Swang Hui, left a video explaining his grievances, but took the step of removing the hard drive from his computer and disposing of his cell phone shortly before the massacre? That also happened in 2008. Northern Illinois shooter Stephen Kazmierzak removed his SIM card from his phone and the hard drive from his laptop. Did you know all this, folks? I didn't. How about 2012 Sandy Hook shooter? They should put that in quotes. And Alanza had removed the hard drive from his computer and smashed it with a hammer or a screwdriver. How's the coincidence not connectable here? Who is the homegrown extremist? Why, what was on those laptops that they didn't have their hard drives? Maybe the handlers? Maybe the connections? Maybe a surety that there couldn't be anything said? That all these people are essentially setups and patsies? Just as I partly think has gone on with the Paddock story? That's why I told you, because we saw his picture, supposedly his picture, being shot in the room, and all the anomalies with that. We've never seen that before. That was to lead our minds into that was real. We've never seen that before. Was he the patsy? He thought he didn't know he was going to be the show? He was cool with it up until he found out he wasn't going to be part of the show, and then the evidence gets pulled out by the real perpetrators? Certainly makes a possibility and category of probability for me after I hear what's going on this week with all the other things. The government has designs on you all. Britain is involved, and they created Israel, and they're all involved. Israel's created back in here, going after presidents, or at least funding anti-Castro groups. And we all know the other story. We can go on in the history of finding that one out. I don't even want to be backtracked a little bit. I got to keep moving. I got a point to make even further than this. Because it shows the history of what I've been telling you, not because just I was saying it was in the news. I was identifying it. Others were too, but I wanted to show you the mirror of the Middle East eventually. How do we get there from Las Vegas? Well, it's the fact of who's actually doing it. Who is taking the hard? Where did those hard drives go? They'll make you think that they got stolen or disappeared or something by the perpetrator. Is that the only option here? Is that the other elephant in the room, the gorilla in the room? I don't know. We aren't going to say, we're not knowing how it happened. We're just seeing very interesting connections that if you were someone who set these people up, you'd make sure there was no evidence back to you, wouldn't you? And it takes the releasing of documents that everyone thought may not have been a part of even part like the assassination of Kennedy, the documents of that. The collateral information is what's actually more important to me and what more interesting. Admitting that the government that's been hiding this information anyway is the culprit, is the violent extremist in the gates. The domestic enemy in the gates. That's the worst. And you are seeing why it's the worst because you're all crickets. Breaking, FBI releases docs on Sandy Hook showing feds visited shooter before the massacre. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. We got his hard drive was missing too, right? That's why that even came up. Wow, that's interesting information. Is it an answer about Sandy Hook? Absolutely not. But how is it so coincident that we see the records show the FBI was dealing with Adam Lanza before the massacre? And he happens to be one of the people on the list that we find the hard drive. It's not available for interrogation. Who are these players behind the scenes? What's going on? That's why I say my whole view on this thing by 2001 when I saw 9/11 and Phil Restino's promotion to try and get justice for some people there in Daytona, as I moved back there quickly, was they went and done it, folks. I don't even need to know how. They went and done it. It's these people. It's this thread of destruction. The players are in our life. I don't know how we all got here to have to suffer these people, but we are. And I know maybe that's the test. Are we going to rise up to stop that oppression, or are we going to let it happen? This is global oppression. Internal domestic enemies, folks. It's all inside. Why isn't anybody doing it? Because they're all part of it. Fusion GPS fallout. DNC Clinton FBI take heat after bombshell that Dems funded Trump dossier. FBI is involved again. Clinton is involved. The Democratic National Conference is involved, or committee is involved. It's the political infighting that goes on, but there's third-party partnerships involved that work to undermine your country, and I don't see anybody going to jail over it. I don't care about the Trump dossier and the lies, and guess who gets tied back to that but British intelligence again? Are you making the connection? The firm hired a British intelligence officer, Christopher Steele, to write the now infamous dossier. Christopher Steele, S-T-E-E-L-E. Boy, that name has been coming up in the news lately. Why is it also tied to intelligence or the outing of intelligence? I don't know, but it's another coincidence. Get back to the point. The FBI is involved in creating dossiers that they hire British intelligence in order to foster and encourage what they need. They'll do whatever they need. The only way it comes out is documents can come out and cause a stink. And you then have to then get in and clean that out. Otherwise, it's going to be covered back over like anything in a cat box. How's that? I'll make it nice and simple. Where does this go? Who are the players? We don't know until documents come out or they admit what's going on. They confess their sins, folks. And are we going to sit back is my only observation. Do we continue to be lulled into this nonsense that we're fed? At the same week, more memos coming out. The destruction of things and the imposition of on people, the death of people, millions of people. Do you appreciate this? Do you really appreciate this? I actually can't appreciate it as deeply as I need to, because I need to be focused on not being all wrapped up on how terrible, horrific this truly, truly is. It just looks, I say, okay, that's far enough for my mind to go. I just need to roll my sleeves up maybe a little bit farther. Whatever it is I'm doing, it doesn't look like it's connected, but I'm exposing, my work does expose for those that want to see what needs to be seen. We didn't do a foundational lawsuit in 2013 that starts to expose a lot of this nonsense, even though it doesn't look like it. Exposes the methods, exposes all this stuff. We didn't do that out of for no good reason, I can see. It may never be appreciated, That's going to be the shame of us. But we move on. Who are the players behind the scenes, and how they lie right in front of you, and you're watching? Bombshell NSA memo. Again, this disclosure of information is the only thing helping us to start to see. And before I go too far, remember, there's always the possibility and category. Even though I agree, I not agree, but I will believe what I'm going to say. Don't ever forget you have to have the possibility and category that even all of this is the scam. And then if you come to that point where you can kind of prove that out, you better go look where your intuition tells you to go look, because there's something there. So it's not like I'm embracing all this without a thought, and I talk real quickly here on the broadcast, and everything is hunky-dory because now I've proved it. No, it's just a story on the internet. But does it add up to other things? Do I then see how those things are very consistent with things I'm actually dealing with? And at some point, there's the truth right there. But another bombshell memo, more disclosed information at the time they were disclosing the JFK thing, which they never really are going to disclose, I don't think. How can you do that? How can you disclose to anybody redactions and under the cover, the color of authority, the felony against you for national security? See, I have a suspicion that we're actually seeing a couple of people still alive that they're protecting. And that would focus in on the CIA being one of the players, which Piper was actually put on his chart. And I didn't know anything about this till I saw the video, and I had to research it further. But it makes sense to me. I'd have to hold that as a possibility category, a probability, given the facts are true, that the CIA was involved with the Mossad during the assassination. So who was involved with the Mossad at that time is a guy that's still alive. He ended up being president, and he's still alive. In fact, he's in the news this week. Are they protecting that guy? I don't know. But it sure seems odd that you would think after 50-something years, they could let the information out and we could figure it out. If everyone was dead that had the nasty part of it, then it wouldn't matter, would it? But something's still holding this thing up. Something's still holding it up, and I got a suspicion we got still some live players that actually have high profiles. Notwithstanding, the memos, getting the disclosure is important. A bombshell NSA memo, Saudi Arabia ordered attack on Damascus International Airport with U.S. knowledge. Okay, so we have the proof that the United States knew that Saudi Arabia is attacking the Damascus airport. The thing about this is that you have to look at the story on what's being told to us. Who are the players? Well, who did do 911? Why were there Saudi Arabia citizens in the planes that the MSM didn't fabricate? Who were those faces that say, well, wait a minute, these are the people that were supposed to be on the plane in Egypt? Who are the players in all this still? Is what goes through my mind, I read this. But here's the point. It all goes good until it goes bad. Remember, the Saudis went after Qatar, and Qatar is now protecting itself. And so the story starts popping out, the memos start showing up, and we start seeing the truth of the alliance. They talk about the axis of evil. Britain and the United States create Israel. So that's the starting axis. Now we see the United States. We don't see Britain here in this story, I don't think. We see the United States is involved in working with Saudi Arabia, bombing another democratically a sovereign government, democratically elected. However, you might feel on a political side of this. That they work through the Free Syrian Army. Okay, so that's a mercenary army for Saudis and the United States. Otherwise, the United States, as the white hat, would stop the crime against someone if it was going to stop the oppression, we would think. Don't you think? They would want to step in and say, no, you don't go bomb a sovereign if that's what we're here for. No, but they're here to do that. And this whole thing starts to roll out on us to tell us exactly what I've seen in the news, what I told you, what you probably may have come up with on your own. But this is a bigger alliance of evil. And they're now, and as today you hear more and more, they've been agreeing to it all, and they're agreeable to committing these evils. Saudi Arabia was involved. Well, who did 911? Saudi Arabia pops up again. Israel has people, whatever capacity, jumping up and down near Havana in support of the towers going down. What's the real story? I don't know. But, folks, they went and done it, and we're seeing that all the alliance of evil is coming out in the wash due to document disclosure. Notwithstanding what I think about WikiLeaks and its part, given the documents that are disclosed are the truth, we can see through even what WikiLeaks wants to say, as I showed you last week was going on with what their presentation was. But because now Saudi may have not been doing a very good strategic thing when they attacked Qatar, to throw Qatar under the bus, not guitar, not playing music here, guitar, gutter, cutter, however you want to say it. Now Qatar's going to defend itself, and it does. It comes out and says, in what's deemed to be a shocking viral interview, Qatar confesses secrets behind Syrian war. And what I found interesting about this is that they only mentioned, they said that there's 4 countries. 4 countries involved that Qatar is outing. And what I find very interesting is what's not being outed are a bunch of others, and in the story, if you read closely, it's not just 4. And it also omits the fraud by omission, that gorilla, 600-pound gorilla in the room, where in the report you hear Qatar is admitting that what they did was attended regime change in Syria, get Assad out. We said they heard the memo now that getting Assad out would preserve the nuclear monopoly that Israel enjoys. But we also notice, as I talked to you then at the time, 2 other countries. They point out 4, but they mention 2 others in who were helping set this whole thing up against Syria. Was Turkey and Jordan. There wasn't 4. There was at least 6. And then the unmentionable one. The 600-pound gorilla. The one that if you mention in publication you get fired over. The one that I noticed in the comments was being identified almost immediately. The one that's on record that says it needs a regime change in Syria, as well as all these other players. The one that gets the money from the United States to do this, that makes the infrastructure to sell war material out to have other governments commit apartheid or genocide on other people within their governments. The one that, the creation that seems to have no moral compass whatsoever. We see the connection through its intention at the same time as this attack on Syria. The rule of law and democracy coming to bring freedom to the people of Syria. And you see the bigger plan. We saw the plan, 7 countries had to die. Syria hasn't gone down yet, so now they're going at North Korea. Those 2 were on it as well, the target being Iran. Iran, if I didn't insult too many people from there. But we see the same regime change dot connection in the intention of Israel. Who isn't even a country, who doesn't even have its own land, who isn't actually recognized in the world, but for its creation through the Balfour Declaration, the creation that Britain had a role to play, make it a weapon of mass destruction. In this case, for regime change everywhere, that Israel's intention would be no different than these alliance of evil, than regime change. We see in this next position, Israel launches airstrikes on Syria and Assad's waiting game, again from Zero Hedge. And I only found these as quickly as I could. I don't have time to go find maybe better places. If you have better places for me to go, markonthebeast.yahoo.com. But again, I got to pull this stuff pretty quick when I have an idea. I just go after whatever I can see mentioning these things. Immediately after Israel's latest unprovoked strike on Syria, we pose the question, did Benjamin Netanyahu just panic? The answer is yes. Israel is now acting from a position of desperation as it had failed in its goal of regime change in Syria. I'll stop reading there. I think that's enough. I think we see what the whole purpose of this entire thing, that the United States of America, the people now, the men and women in the country, have been foisted upon by, and that this government, this district in Washington, D.C., is being controlled by its creation. Think about that. Think about that in the context of climate change and sustainable development and the cause of the problem where mankind is against the creation. And your humanistic turn, instead of looking at the guidance from nature. I don't see this as much of anything different. I just see it as the more physical manifestation of a real evil in our consciousness, our awareness, and against our better intention. This is all about destroying a people or peoples for other motives. And I don't even want to we can hear all the stories. The point is we have to strip the blinders from ourselves. And we have to see the reality for what it is, wherever it is. I don't know, I think about, well, what more can we say than to expose it? But it's not just saying, it's figuring out something to do about it. And if I can transition now to, we see that Israel is just a creation of two warmongering states, one of which was supposed to be separate, the United States from England. But we don't even speak the language. We actually speak the English, not American. And you notice, I've told you, if you hadn't paid attention, go look at any history book. They'll tell you the United States was a political jurisdiction that was encumbered with what? Between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, but commerce obligations. And police is the enforcement for purposes of revenue of commerce compacts. And that political jurisdiction is only one of 5 to 7, depending on your analysis, elements of total sovereignty. Should start to put a little bit of a twist in your mind when you look at Article 6 in that Constitution. It says that this Constitution is subject to the debts and engagements entered into. And I've went through this before years and years and years ago. Won't do it today. The writing is in history, in the paperwork book, not the history as it's told by the victor, but as they acted in paper, in documents to give us notice. The memos that we see, we finally get disclosure, are not even talking about how to solve the problem of the assassination of Kennedy. They're saying how diabolical the government that allowed something to happen to a president actually is. And how I believe that hasn't stopped playing out until today. And we have this creation called Israel having no ancient claim, being used to destroy people around the world. And I try to justify why we don't respond by different ways, just I guess maybe to make myself sane a bit about the fact of our cricketness. But we always have these things that, again, we're told on how we can watch these things and be numb. Comfortably numb. I think there was a song against or in the witness of it. It's a real problem. Why the same government that would use biological attacks against people to starve them out, how they won't turn that same attention into depriving people of things they need is an element of this whole thing I'm talking about today. Analyzing the battlefield. What are we up against? Where's the evidence of these things? Here we got the government of the United States that professed to use biological controls on people to starve them and kill them. And we don't think they're going to use, I guess we can call them biological controls to help you. You don't think they're going to obstruct those from your care? And we get a little report. I'll move on now, moving into a different facet of this control structure. That I've asked you, all who are involved in some of this, to get involved in writing letters to show and bring the evidence to refute this myth that there's no good that this plant can do. Marijuana compound removes Alzheimer's plaque from brain cells, study finds. I'm not going to qualify more. Here's a study you could use to say it removes plaque from brain cells. Do you think maybe they want to keep this stuff from you? So do you have lots of plaque on your brain cells, given this is the case? Am I saying that they knew this, the pharmaceuticals knew this? No, but they know it does something, so they just keep it away from you. And I've also marveled and said again and observed again, as another conversation came through, and I can't remember now where, why was it, as I noticed early on, this marijuana legalization, the control of marijuana's use, why did they, in most of the laws I saw being advanced, why did they all withhold the extracts from any appreciable possession? Why is this government and all these state and your local governments, your counties with these people in the seats of decision that shouldn't and ought not be there, why are they thinking that their county authority and police power has a right to decide to determine all this on code enforcement? I don't know, and even more so since I did the study on the equity action. When I find out, just as land law says, county can't enforce a code ordinance in the general unless it owns the property, and by one state's statement that ordinance enforcement is in compliance with a comprehensive plan. Is your private property any of that, folks? No, the quick answer is no. You don't even hit one of the three elements. Who do these people think they can keep this plant from us when we have a disposal right in America? Maybe not anywhere else, but in America at least. It says we have the right to do things on our land exclusive of the United States, exclusive of local governments. Why don't we go back to that? I don't know. Why do we allow them to, for so long, keep these things from us, and then when you tie it together to a war scenario, that the withholding from you of something you need is a weapon against you? Maybe you've got a different view, hopefully. Maybe you'll get a little fired up. Maybe, hey, this is something that they're doing to hurt us. And I'm on record. I'm not someone that uses marijuana, has used it. I could care less. It's never been a draw to me. What became a draw to me was when I started to see people using it for themselves, and it did do something. From that standpoint, I'm completely agreeable, being it's a plant of anybody's use for what they think they need, and certainly not if they're not hurting anybody. That we see it actually does something is interesting, given the story we've been told. That I see crickets, and I'm telling you to respond with this new evidence to stop this nonsense. One less thing in our reality that's not a lie, and I hear crickets amongst the people that ought to be, is really disappointing at some point. And that's how they're doing this to us. But there's one more study, folks. Well, I haven't qualified it, but they say that marijuana compound, not the whole plant, a compound within the plant. And this we have to look very carefully. This is why you got to look at the whole issue here. It removes Alzheimer's plaque. Very important. How much money is being made by pharma all the time, and how much money goes to the bottom line of the government's GDP to allow this crime against us when we can't use these natural plants or compounds? And I'll say marijuana has a very particular, depending on the material you have. It's an example of what you got to be careful of when you use herbs. Certain types of concentration processes will only pull out and extract certain types of things, and if you're not paying attention, you're wasting your time and money anyway. It's not so simple at some level either. You just not absent-mindedly go. You'd have to figure out what you're after. This is not... Anyway, so, why are they keeping this from you? I can only figure out it's because they're attacking you with it. It's a weapon against you. You're going to have to step up if you want to not be interfered with by it. And in the process, if you go from the side I'm talking about, the grant side of this, then they don't have a cause that they can come up in the future, and you've really settled the matter, really made peace around it again. Their war was a war against you, not for the sake of ending the drugs, but to continue their monopoly and control, because it also keeps your mind controlled. Now we have another type of infection going on. We're going to the cyber world. After I got off the broadcast last week, this report came out. Cyber hurricane. Millions of devices infected and rapidly replicating botnet. Another attack that they're talking about. When I said cyber hurricane, I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. They'll talk to you about There's all kind. The Internet of Things worm named Mireya infected 2.5 million gadgets worldwide, building a botnet that sent unstoppable floods of junk traffic and took down major internet services, including Spotify, PayPal, and Reddit. Is your future, folks. If you want to keep buying into this cashless nonsense and digital world and big data, I'm asking you to create the parallel universe that we came from, reinstitute that. I deemed this so-called cyber hurricane. I was talking about it last week. I said, I guess I should be more careful of what I say during a broadcast. And then I have a virtual Cybernado. This is how they're taking us out. They infect us no matter where we go. They infect our bodies. They infect our systems. And then we have to deal with it. We don't listen to the information we should. When we finally get disclosed the information we ought to know, we don't do anything about it. We don't build the barriers. I think Ron Stephen made a good observation. When they tore down the wall in Germany, that was tearing down the cell wall that made the distinction between the Soviet and the West. And now they've flooded in the Soviet to make it what? Now you see the European Union. A diminishment of everything that we should be holding to, as reflected by what worked in the United States of America, the thing and distinct, unique thing in all of the world, as against all government oppression. Not that you'd be able to keep it, because there's going to be that plunder, but that it's there to be kept. And I think when more of us get together and understand that, and work in unison, not unity, because that's the global, but the unison with our rights and expectations of what should be, and make accountability to the failure to adhere to that, we're going to have a better day in the world. I think maybe I'm just throwing that off a bit, but I do believe so. It seems to answer quite a bit pretty quickly when we have accountability to, if you can, just trespass. But I'm not talking just any trespass. We're talking felony crimes, and when they touch on the laws that make the protection, that brings the peace and settlement, contrary to what Britain created or had a role in creating with England, the United States, to make this thing called Israel. Contrary to that example, we have a better one. And unless we insist on that better one, and I get at it through all these subject matters, to inform us better, and I'm asking us, then we have to take the steps it takes to better engage that which has come against us to destroy us. And it is doing so. I can't imagine anybody looking out and thinking what they're watching is something you want to live on. I was going to say normal, but remember, the deviance in the new normal. That's how they're doing it. There's all tied together. I'm just astonished at what came out this week. I almost got a little confused at its sourcing, what came from where and this and that, but it's just a bunch of information that came together to show us, prove what the Balfour Declaration was about. We have a weapon of mass destruction. It's destroying in the world, and it goes to destroy the world, and governments are cool with that. Expanding now the Middle East problem that we now see is all a fabrication, and 911 starts to look a little bit more heinous, even for the most governmentally protective. Thank you for tuning in today. I hope something I said gives you insight, some awareness. Grimner, thank you for what you do at reallibertymedia.com, allowing the archives, blogcaster, and all that, and for the other hosts as well. And Jules over at ucy.tv, thank you very much for what you do, the daily recast and broadcast, and then on Thursday, the recast on Thursday. And all your terrestrial broadcasters, appreciate it, whatever you're doing. And I'll see you next week. Tech diffs are nature willing. Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
What That's what opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, you just opened a whole case of whoop-ass.